I spoke to Helen Clark, Administrator at the United Nations Development Programme, on the way forward towards inclusivity and assisting developing nations in Africa and elsewhere achieve the 2030 Development Agenda. Take a look. Today there's a lot of focus on Africa, mostly from investors, because this is where maybe there's a lot of growth, double-digit growth. But help us create the link between development work in the continent and really the activity of the private sector that we see in Africa today.
Well, the African private sector is vibrant, and here we are in Nairobi, which is a hub of particularly vibrant activity.
Yeah.
The truth is that the big agendas aren't going to be achieved without the private sector on board and having the confidence to invest country by country, and of course at the borders where you need the all-important transport and other links to be working effectively. This Global Partnership Conference very much has a focus on bringing the private sector into these conversations,
yeah,
and also stressing that official development assistance can have a role in supporting growing the enabling environment in which the private sector will be encouraged to invest and take a strong lead. For UNDP, our bread and butter work is to work on the capacity of institutions, governance, anti-corruption, transparency, regulatory and policy environments, all the kinds of things that help give confidence in a country.
Right. You mentioned about ODA. Help us understand what role ODA must play in this, because we know the numbers have been coming in short.
Well, the ODA absolutely has plateaued in total. Ever since the global financial crisis, it's been under pressure. But worse, with the protracted crises like the Syrian one, and frankly there are others as well, the amount of money that is being diverted from long-term development into the emergency end of the spectrum is quite significant. So this again reinforces the importance of what the Addis Ababa Action Agenda said last year. We must draw on all sources of financing, public and private, domestic and international. On domestic resource mobilisation, very important. And here we are in this vibrant economy. We're having the tax system working, able to do its job, and raising the revenue for the country becomes important. OECD and UNDP have a specific initiative on tax inspectors without borders to support developing countries to beef up their tax audit capacity and get in the tax that's owed to them, including from international companies.
Now, in Africa today, we are looking at Agenda 2063, and we have the Agenda 2030, which is for the SDGs. But we are coming from a very unique place where we underperformed on MDGs. What are some of the challenges that could be tackled looking at 2030?
Well, the MDGs were a mixed picture. Some countries did very well, others with a range of challenges didn't do so well. So what are the challenges? It's very hard to get any development when you are at war. You look at South Sudan and compare it with the stability of Kenya. There's just no comparison. You can't get ahead while there's war. And sadly, South Sudan is the only country on the continent to experiencing that. Secondly, there has to be investment in the human capital. In the youth, we have this very large demographic bubble going through the societies on the continent. Now, youth will give countries a demographic dividend if countries give back to youth. That is education, it's skills, it's opportunity for work, livelihoods, entrepreneurship, and voice. The youth want to speak out these days, they want to be engaged. So I think a big challenge is going to be to support the youth on a positive track that will contribute to development. Third big challenge is climate change in the continent. This country has so many countries which are so vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So drawing on the sources of finance that are coming through the climate stream, whether it's carbon trading, whether it's the Green Climate Fund, whether it's investors who are moving towards investments specifically with sustainable development and climate-friendly development in mind, this is going to be very, very important.
Let's talk about the role of developed countries in helping Africa achieve their SDGs, because we know the financing gap is about $600 billion. What's the role of the developed world in helping Africa walk through this journey in terms of resources?
Well, I think there's a couple of roles. Firstly, of course, developing countries would like to see the pledge for 0.7% of gross national income of developed countries going towards development on it. And there's only 5 or 6 countries which have actually met that. They tend to be in the north of Europe. Scandinavian countries in some cases have done very well. And Britain, despite all the challenges from the global crisis, came through with significant development support. So we need the numbers up from others as well. Secondly, we need the developed countries to be encouraging their companies to come and invest in Africa, to see the potential of Africa, to form the partnerships that will make that possible. And if we're looking for a win-win, if the official development assistance is geared at the capacity building for Africa to create the environments which will attract investment, then you'll get a virtuous cycle of investment.
All right. Finally, here at the high-level meeting of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, there's a lot of talk about inclusivity, having everyone on board. What sort of frameworks do we need for this? Because we've had partnerships before, but not everyone gets on board because of the unique challenges that each country faces.
I think the partnerships have to be at the country level. So it's a question of governments having a big vision for development, which is an inclusive vision. It's not just something that the government can proclaim ex cathedra and say that's the way it's going to be. No, the development visions have to be developed in an inclusive way, and the role of all the stakeholders are appreciated. So, you know, one looks country by country. Are the parliamentarians fully engaged? They're going to have to vote through the budgets and approve the policies. Is the civil society engaged? So important, particularly from community level up development. Is the local government on board? Local government has a very important role. In Kenya, for example, local government's been empowered. Its role is phenomenal. And then the private sector wants to be in the conversation because it helps them then develop their strategies going forward, and they can be in sync with the national plan. So I'd say inclusiveness starts right here at the country level.